Hello, this is DC Hammer, and today on the DC Hammer Show, we continue to twist the tail of the Red Dragon, taking a deeper dive into the murky realms exposed in the Hudson Institute report, the Chinese Communist Party's foreign interference operations, how the U.S. and other democracies should respond. So let's continue the revelation of the most dangerous assault on American freedom. And yes, I know the argument can be made that's either Mueller's American Inquisition or Nancy the Gavel Pelosi's blossoming reign of terror in the House of Representatives, but actually it is the decades-long and intensifying onslaught of the Communist Chinese to destroy the United States with the help of dragon buddies like Dinosaur Dianne Feinstein, and then dominate the world. Chapter 1 of this illuminating report maps out the influence system that the Chinese Communist Party and the United Front represent. Do not forget, the Chinese Party operates the Chinese state, and the Chinese Party is ruled at this point by Emperor Xi Jinping, who has in essence nominated himself to be the leader of that communist state for life. The Communist Party is at the core of the Chinese Party state and is the primary decision-making process in almost anything that takes place in China and in the diaspora, which is the areas of influence around the world in which the Chinese have migrated and set up new pockets of influence. For example, the 5 million Chinese Americans that live here in the United States. The primary goal of the Communist Party is to remain in power. That is job one. And so anything that the ruler of that party, and in this case it's Emperor Xi, does, he then takes whatever action he deems necessary in order for him to remain in power and for the Communist Party to not only rule the state of Communist China, but also for the Red Dragon to spread its tail and fire across the world. The United Front strategy is actually an offshoot of what the Bolsheviks did during the Russian Civil War. Go back to 1917, that era. The United Front was a strategy that was developed in order for the prior communist state to dominate the area of Russia, which became the Soviet Union and is now the Soviet Republic. In China, the United Front was used to make a transition from the communists operating on their own and the Kuomintang, this KMT, which were the warlords in the areas during the 40s, 30s, and 40s. And by the 1950s, the Chinese Communist Party organized it into a second United Front that pulled those forces together, making them a force that any other party in China was unable to resist. Today, that United Front strategy is a keystone in order for the Communist Chinese, for the Red Dragon, to not only continue to succeed in controlling all the diverse groups within its own borders, but also then as a strategy that enables them to project that strategy worldwide. You may not have even heard of the United Front before, and that's because it's a closely held strategy that very few people have even written about, let alone know the intricacies of, in order to explain it to others. As the report demonstrates, United Front work is a complex set of institutions and organizations acting as key elements of surveillance and political influence. Totalitarian states, dictatorships such as Communist China do not succeed unless they know what all potential adversaries of their strategies and plans are, and surfaces them in a way that enables the communists to crush them, preventing them from having any influence on the direction of the state and the direction of the party. The Chinese Communist Party has a central committee, and the UFWD, the United Front Work Department, is a subset of that central committee. Primary objectives of this group are to proliferate propaganda and to ensure that all dissenting opinion is censored. Isn't it interesting that Apple has opened up so many operations in communist China And Apple and other tech companies from the Silicon Valley are openly engaged in censorship through their social media platforms. I don't think they invented that strategy by themselves. It appears that Silicon Valley is now, in my opinion, just a subset of the UFWD. And the Communist Chinese Party also ensures that its legitimacy is promoted by supporting Chinese language and cultural programs through its Ministry of Culture and the Office of Chinese Language Council International, and they do it through willing puppets such as Senator Dianne Feinstein in the United States, who, since she was a mayor of San Francisco back in the 1970s, has been one of the key proponents for Communist China and a propaganda piece to ensure that all of the slavery, organ harvesting, crushing of ethnic and religious minorities in Communist China are kept silent and unknown. So the CCP uses its Ministry of Foreign Affairs through its embassies and consulates around the world, and then uses its state-of-the-art spying techniques, blackmailing techniques, entrapment through debt closure on certain states. Whatever the technique is that will work in a particular area, the CCP rolls out in royal fashion. As the Red Dragon continues to flick its tail and spew its fire throughout the world, its Overseas Liaison Bureau and other subsets of the CCP continue to spread out as if the Red Dragon is actually a red octopus with tentacles going in all directions, such as the Belt and Road Initiative. The Red Dragon uses economic ties as political leverage, and that is seen in almost any of their activities abroad. Again, when it comes to the Belt and Road Initiative, as it's used throughout the world, not just in Asia or even headed towards the upper regions above China, but all over the world, and particularly the Belt and Road Initiative is aimed at influencing countries within Europe. Money is the lure, influence peddling is the technique, and willing accomplices are critical in order for this to be achieved. Beyond Dinosaur Dianne Feinstein in the United States Senate, you have former British Prime Minister Cameron, who was also essential in what the Communist Chinese were doing in order to spread their influence and interference abroad. So by this point in time, the number of American organizations and the number of people within those organizations and institutions and the governmental systems have been captured by this strategy and are held hostage to its success. As the Chinese party's endeavors do not succeed, then those individuals will tumble with the Chinese. So they create this web of intrigue, this interconnectivity of peoples and economic tools in order to not only keep the influence peddling going, but for it to gain steam and become irreversible. And in order for that to succeed, intelligence gathering is essential. So throughout the world, the Communist Chinese have developed a world-class network of spies, spying organizations, espionage techniques, and almost an unstoppable influence peddling routine. The Chinese learned that they don't need to crack into the Pentagon. Of course they do, but they don't need to in order to achieve their goals. They have found that cultivating vast quantities of information, even low-level information, that they then can use their rooms full of analysts to interconnect and to work into a fashion that enables the decision makers, the Red Dragon leaders, now the puppet masters of the other countries in the world that have fallen under their influence, to then design additional multi-pronged strategies within the United States and Europe, and then they can bite off bigger game, such as the high-tech areas within those nations. Hence, Silicon Valley has been one of their primary targets in the last couple decades, and they have been extremely successful in drawing them into the fold. And as this diagram demonstrates, The Communist Chinese Party, at the hub of the wheel in essence, then the spokes outward, or the layers moving outward. You have the State Council, the Party Central Committee. Then there's the ministries of education and other departments, including the critical United Front Work Department. And outside of that ring, the next ring are these private Chinese companies, the state-owned think tanks, and on the outer ring of this five-tiered system are their actual students and the associations of students abroad. And so then when they send people over to learn in the United States and they infiltrate and take over entire institutions such as the University of California, Berkeley, many of them are just there to study and to learn for themselves and to either return to the mainland and be successful in different endeavors, or they are operating as spies or influencers, or even if they remain in the United States or other Western countries, they would use what they have learned in order not to just make themselves rich or prosperous, but also then to bring that wealth to the mother country, to bring that home to the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese Red Dragon state. This is all about control. They create parasitic relationships with outsiders. And yes, I would call the people that have, the senators, the members of the House of Representatives of the United States that have put American interests aside, have put themselves and the interests of the Communist Chinese, although it can be very rewarding to those individuals that have succumbed to this, but have created this process where China wins. Temporarily, the influence peddler may win, and hopefully someday many of these people will be held to account for the treasonous, seditious, and otherwise illegal acts that they have performed. But it's definitely a completely losing strategy for the country the parasites have attached themselves to. And unfortunately, in this case, that's the United States of America. It is the allies of the Communist Chinese that make it possible. And all criticism of Chinese influence is declared by the CCP to be racially motivated. They have learned, as the Democrats learned in the United States, that whenever something is uncovered that makes your position appear to be weak, you immediately attack the person that has brought your weakness, your faulty argument, your failing program to the light, and immediately accuse them of racism. It has been successful for the Democrats, and again, the Democrat Party is virtually inseparable at this point from the Communist Party, and that's growing on a daily basis. Thank you, Ocasio-Cortez. And you have many people to blame for that taking place. I've already mentioned a few, but in the weeks and in the days, weeks, and months to come, if what Q-Team and others has said will happen truly does occur, and the light is shined in the darkness, and these people are held to account, indictments are unsealed, and people are tried for what they have done, it will be shocking but necessary to learn the depth to which this entire program emanating from the Communist state of China, the Red Dragon, what it has done to make this take place. And it's not just in the United States. The CCP has concentrated influencing and interfering in the operations of other Western states. One of them in particular is Australia. The Chinese took advantage of very slack campaign finance laws. Of course, they used that same approach here in the United States, but it was one of their primary assaults on Australia, continuing to this day. They not only create puppets that then enter government service and actually serve as quote-unquote political leaders, they're actually, in many cases, more subservient to the Communist Chinese Party than they are to the party that they represent in the foreign country. They also use donors to dominate the system. This goes back in the United States, back to the 1990s, the Clinton administration, with Johnny Chung and others from Communist China that did influence peddling in the United States into an operation that became known as Chinagate. And I would say that that was Chinagate 1.0. We are now into Chinagate probably 2.0 or 3.0 by now. And just as in the United States, in Australia, there are business people, Helen Liu and others, that are involved in this nefarious activities, with hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars being spent to influence the New South Wales Labor Party and other political parties within Australia in order for the Communist Chinese to succeed in their ventures within Australia. Of course, nation states do respond, take action when they finally wake up and realize the damage that's being done by the Red Dragon. And Australia has responded. Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull's government responded by introducing bills in their legislature in order to combat the influence of the Communist Chinese Party. Sometimes action be taken to reverse the damage, and other times the damage is too severe for the nation to survive. We'll see where Australia and the United States fall into those paradigms. So in their information collecting activities, the Communist Chinese then create these enormous databases in order to use them for lobbying foreign nations and in their influence activities. One of the primary tools to protect a nation against this foreign influence and interference by operations such as the Communist Chinese Party, it's public opinion, openness, the ability to share information for people to understand how dangerous these political actors from overseas are, the fact that they are definitely not benign, that their intentions are not to just create spheres of influence in a way that would be a win-win for the initiating country and for the targets. Rather, again, this is a parasitic relationship in which the Communist Chinese, the Red Dragon, plans to suck the lifeblood from any nation that they choose to target, and to continue sucking that blood until there is nothing left and that nation collapses. The Communist Chinese then move in, and that nation becomes another province of Communist China. The Communist Chinese have used the same techniques in New Zealand, and in fact it appears to have been more successful in New Zealand than it has been in Australia. In New Zealand, the United Front has actually been able to interfere with politics at the top end, and they have not had to so much work their way up through the bottom or involving parties that needed to work their way into influence. They have started at the top, and they've influenced members of the parliament in a way that makes it more difficult for New Zealand to work its way out of this trap than it is for the United States or Australia, unfortunately. And naturally, the intrusion into New Zealand is not just political, it is also on the business front. And many projects within New Zealand reveal just how deeply the Red Dragon has sunk its claws into the fabric of New Zealand and its business structure. From one end of New Zealand to the other, the influence of the Communist Chinese is prevalent and obvious. And their one belt, one road policy continues to succeed under the sleeping eyes of many people within these countries. But again, these would not succeed if it wasn't for the number of people that the Communist Chinese have deployed abroad, and behind the smiles and the courteous bowing or handshakes, you have people that are dedicated to the destruction of the countries in which they are currently temporarily residing, and their allegiance is fully to the Communist Chinese state. We have witnessed backlash against the Communist Chinese in the United States in the form of Donald Trump, his trade advisors, Peter Navarro and Lighthouser. In Australia, there has similarly been a backlash, but there is no major backlash in New Zealand, and New Zealand will soon pay the price for apparently being either unwilling or unable to see the light. So Australia and New Zealand are both cautionary tales of how the Communist Chinese Party interferes in foreign states, uses foreign donations in their political systems, enables the Communist Chinese to take over and destroy that state, ensuring that unless turned back, their initiatives will destroy the fabric of the nation that they have targeted, and that although the United States, as this report points out, has stronger laws, it is still subject to many of the interference methods that are being used. So it would behoove all of us to take a close look at what has happened in Australia and New Zealand and use that as an example of what can happen to us. We are on the brink of it, the United States. We have influence peddlers, those for 40 years in the case of Dinosaur Dianne Feinstein, 20 plus years in the case of the Clintons, a decade in the case of people like Barack Obama, that are continuing to undermine this entire Democrat process and system. So until next time, part 3 of the series on this report for the Hudson Institute about the Communist Chinese Party, I say, heads up, open your eyes. We need to shine the light on darkness. Do your own research. Do not let the smiling faces and the outstretched hands and the bowing fool you. The red dragon is meant to destroy us all. And now the DC Hammer Show is available as an audio podcast on Podcast Garden or iTunes. Just search for DC Hammer or News Network Analysis Associates. God bless.